Hi, I'm Trevor Austin, founder of Authentic Life Financial Planning. In this video, we're going through how to prepare for a liquidity event, such as an IPO or M&A. How do you actually prepare for a liquidity event? This is my kind of 5-step process that I follow with my clients to help us understand what they should be doing as they go through either an IPO or a merger or acquisition. As I've said before, the biggest, probably most important thing is to have a plan. And the way to do that is to first gather information. We'll talk about what information you will need as part of this process to make the right decisions for you. But you have to gather that information first and foremost so that you know what you actually should be doing. The second step is understanding what you own. So just because you've been granted shares over time doesn't mean you still own all those shares at that point. It also doesn't mean that shares that you have had granted to you will be vested and owned by you by the time that you are going through the liquidity event. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Third step is you need to understand the tax. This is probably the most important thing, and I realize I'm getting a little more emotional and maybe loud, so sorry about that. But the reality is not planning for the tax and not understanding what the tax bill will be is the number one thing that screws people over when they're going through a liquidity event, by far. So you have to have a plan for the tax, and that plan should not include selling the stock in the future if you're going through an IPO especially. If you're going through a merger, especially if the purchasing company is private, that generally won't matter because it generally will be a cash purchase rather than a stock purchase. But it could be both. It could be a combo. Or it could be a stock purchase even though it is going private. And so when that happens, if you're going to get taxed on it, you have to have the cash in advance so that you are not surprised in April and have tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars of tax due and you don't have a way to pay for it. So you need to have a plan for the tax. That's by far the number one thing that you need to be doing if you're going through a liquidity event. And I'll talk about that more in a little bit here. Once you understand the tax, and once you understand what you own, then you will know what your net will be. And that it really is the number that you should be focusing on, You should not be focusing on what the gross value is of all your different stock awards. You really need to focus on what the after-tax value is, because that ultimately is what you can then take and use for, car purchases, home purchases, travel, sabbaticals, starting your own business, whatever it may be. Any near-term goals will have to be paid by the net value, not the gross value. So you have to understand the tax, you have to understand what you own, so that you can make any near-term goals. The last step is that you have to plan for diversification. You have to plan for your long-term plan. As we've talked about, you do not know what will happen to your company's stock. Your coworkers don't know, I don't know, nobody knows what is going to happen with your company's stock price. That's especially true after a liquidity event, whether it's an IPO or a merger or acquisition. You just do not know what is going to happen. And again, no one knows. And so because of that, you have to make a plan so that your long-term finances look okay regardless of what happens with the stock price. Essentially, you have to assume that the stock does not do what you're hoping it will do. And then you can plan for what to do with any stock that remains outside of, making sure that your near-term and long-term future are going to be okay. If you're not doing that when you're going through a liquidity event, you will be sorely mistaken on what to actually expect. And I realize I'm being maybe harsh or negative about what to expect from your company stock. But the reality is no one knows what is going to happen. Everyone can prognosticate, but none of that really matters until you actually see what happens with the stock. And the accuracy at which people prognosticate is way, way, way less accurate than they actually think they are. As far as what information is needed when you're going through a liquidity event, there's kind of four key things that I think of when you're gathering this information. First thing is the stock plan itself. So you have to understand what the company is legally allowed to do when it comes to their stock. You also want to know what your rights are when it comes to your company stock, especially when going through a liquidity event, because that'll affect the planning that you are doing. So you have to understand what's going to happen. You have to understand what will actually vest before the liquidity event happens or at the time of the liquidity event. The second thing is any grant awards that you've received, you need to gather those together and understand what you already own, what you will own, and what you won't own. You have to understand those three things so that you can make appropriate decisions and understand what the tax is going to be and understand what your net value is going to be. Again, that really is the key, is understanding the tax and understanding your net value. The third thing is that you have to look back at your history. You have to understand what you have already exercised, what has already vested, and what you've already sold. Doing that, again, gets you closer and closer to that. What is my net going to be? What is the tax owed going to be? And the last thing that you need is any and all liquidity event details as they come out. So for an IPO, you have to understand what the lockup is going to be. You have to understand what the expected price will be and understand that that likely will not be the price you ultimately sell at. And you have to know, will you be able to sell any shares during the lockup? Some companies allow that, where you can sell some percentage of the shares that you own. Others don't and just have a traditional 180-day lockup. Again, that's why you have to understand what your specific company details are and what your specific liquidity event requirements are. For a merger or acquisition, it's pretty much similar. The only difference is, again, there generally is not a lockup, but you need to know what the sale date is. You need to know what the sales price is going to be, and then you need to understand, is it going to be a cash purchase where you essentially give them your stock and you get cash in return, or will it be a stock purchase where essentially your stock will be replaced by the new company's stock, or will it be a combo? That kind of is pretty common, I would say, is the combo. But if you're going from a public company to a private company or a private to a private, it likely will be a cash purchase only. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, please like, subscribe, and drop a comment below with any questions or topics that you would like to see covered. Financial planning is all about creating the life you want. Let's build it together.